Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The map glowed pale green under the projector's hum. Men leaned in, shoulders pressed tight, their voices low and urgent. She sat at the far end, silent, watching their mouths move, their hands trace lines across the valley. Not a single one of them met her eyes. Captain Elise Warren, call sign, Ash. She had learned long ago that silence wasn't weakness. It was weight. It let others underestimate her, leave her out of their circles, until the moment came when she was the only one left standing. Still, there was a sting in the way the commander's words passed over her like smoke, like she wasn't in the room. Her fingers tapped once, twice, against the folder in her lap. The sound disappeared under the scrape of chairs and the shuffling of papers. 4 ridgelines, 2 choke points. If we get cut off here, we're done. The commander's voice carried steel. Elise knew that. She had studied the terrain for nights, memorized the angles, the tree lines, the distances a bullet could travel when the wind shifted. But she kept her notes to herself. If they didn't ask, she wouldn't speak. Not yet. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not about the mission, not about the enemy, something else. Something that coiled in her chest every time she closed her eyes, a memory she couldn't silence. She folded her hands together, the motion tight, controlled. Her knuckles whitened. The mission was simple on paper. Escort a convoy through hostile valley terrain, hold the line until reinforcements linked up. Simple never meant easy. Intelligence had reported scattered enemy presence, small, desperate groups, but Elise knew better. She had seen patterns no one else wanted to see. The radio intercepts weren't random. The silences between transmissions weren't empty. They were waiting. And she felt it, waiting for them. She stepped outside after the briefing, letting the door close behind her. The air smelled of fuel and iron, the scent of the forward operating base. Helicopter blades thudded somewhere in the distance, fading as they rose into the cloudless afternoon. She squinted against the sun. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the small metal chain beneath her uniform, a locket, scratched, dented, but unbroken. Inside was a photograph no one else knew she carried, a girl's smile, her sister. She had told herself she wouldn't bring family into this. That personal ghosts had no place on the battlefield. But that smile, frozen in time, was the only anchor she had left. And this mission, it wasn't just another name on a rotation list. It was where her sister's unit had vanished months before. No trace, no recovery, just gone. Elise swallowed hard. She hadn't told them that, not her commander, not the men who brushed her off in the briefing, because if they knew, they'd call it bias. They'd call it clouded judgment, but it wasn't judgment, it was clarity. She knew what it meant when silence dragged too long on a radio. She knew what it meant when reports contradicted themselves. And she knew, with the kind of certainty that dug into her bones, that this valley was not empty. When the convoy rolled out the next morning, the air was heavy with dust. Engines growled. Metal rattled. Soldiers shifted in the backs of armored trucks, helmets tilted low, eyes darting at the ridges on either side. The sky was a washed-out blue, wide and merciless. Elise sat up front in the lead vehicle, her rifle across her lap. She felt the vibration of the engine in her chest, steady and relentless like a second heartbeat. Her calm face betrayed nothing, but inside her thoughts moved fast. Calculations, distances, patterns of shadow along the rocks. The driver beside her muttered something under his breath. A prayer, maybe. She didn't ask. She could hear the fear under his words, and she respected it. Fear meant you knew what was at stake. Every soldier here carried their own invisible weight. She had glimpsed it in their eyes the night before. A young private staring at a folded letter, lips moving silently as he reread it in the dark. A sergeant holding a photograph under a dim lamp, rubbing his thumb across the faces as though smoothing time itself. They carried families, regrets, promises. She carried all of that too, but she also carried silence. Hours passed. The valley closed in around them. The walls of rock rose higher, narrowing the sky. The convoy's sound echoed back on itself, doubling, tripling, until it felt like the earth itself was warning them away. And then, a crack sharp far away. The convoy froze. Radios flared to life, overlapping voices demanding bearings, confirmation, eyes scanning the ridges. Elise's hand gripped her rifle before anyone spoke. Her heartbeat slowed instead of quickened. Her calm was a blade honed thin. The second shot wasn't far away. Dust spat up inches from the lead truck. "Snipers!" someone shouted. The convoy erupted. Men dove for cover, doors slammed open, boots hit dirt. Elise was already out, rifle raised, eyes narrowed against the glare. She didn't shout, she didn't panic. Her gaze swept the ridgeline, following instinct more than sight. The rocks seemed still, shadows frozen, but she felt it, a pressure, a presence. She dropped to one knee, steadying her breath. Her hands were sure, her finger light on the trigger. A shape shifted just slightly, the faintest flicker of movement against stone. She exhaled. One shot. The silence after was deafening. Someone shouted confirmation. The first threat neutralized. Relief flared, raw and desperate. But Elise didn't lower her weapon. She knew better. Snipers didn't hunt alone. The echo of her shot still rolled through the valley when another burst of fire cracked open the world. Automatic. Close. The ridges erupted. Shadows spat flame. Bullets whipped down like hail, sparking against armor, tearing into dirt. The convoy scattered, men screaming orders over radios, trying to form defense lines. Chaos blurred the air. But in the center of it, Elise stood still. Her calm did not break. She called out ranges, coordinates, her voice cutting through the panic. One by one, soldiers locked into her rhythm, following her sightlines, returning fire where she pointed. Her steadiness bled into them, slowed their panic, sharpened their aim. The valley was alive with death, but she was unbroken. And somewhere inside that storm of fire, a thought struck her cold. This was the same valley, the same echoes, the same trap. Her sister had walked into this. And now Elise was standing where her sister had fallen. She set her jaw, breath even, finger steady. She would not let the same silence swallow them whole. Not this time. What happens to a soldier's mind when the world narrows to dust, fire, and the sound of bullets stitching the air? For most, it's panic. For some, it's paralysis. But for Elise Warren, it was something else. She heard the gunfire like a metronome, each burst of sound measured, predictable, almost musical. The ground shook with impacts, dirt spitting against her cheek as she pressed herself low. But her breathing stayed even. Her finger tapped against her trigger guard once, twice, like she was keeping time. The convoy had broken formation. Men shouted over each other, rifles jerking wildly, trying to return fire against enemies they couldn't see. Bullets sparked off metal. One of the trucks hissed, coolant spilling into the dirt. Someone screamed, a sound that cut sharp before vanishing under another burst of automatic fire. The valley amplified everything. Gunshots ricocheted like thunder between stone walls, making it impossible to know where the next round would come from. Elise's radio crackled with overlapping voices. Fear lived in every syllable. "Get down. We're boxed in. Can't see them, can't." Her calm voice slid between the chaos. "South Ridge, third outcrop, 60 meters. The driver beside her flinched at her tone, not at the words, but at the certainty in them. She wasn't guessing. She was pointing death out like it was a landmark on a tourist map. "Copy firing." Rounds from her side cut into the ridge she'd named. A figure collapsed backward, tumbling against stone. Another shadow shifted higher up. Elise swung her scope, adjusting for wind, for angle. The world slowed to breath and trigger. Another shot, another silence. Her rifle was steady, but her chest burned. Not from fear, but from memory. This valley wasn't just a battlefield. It was a grave. She could almost hear her sister's voice in the crack of the rifles. almost see her silhouette where the shadows moved. She forced the thought down. Not now, focus. A soldier stumbled past her, eyes wide, blood soaking his sleeve. We're pinned. They've got us crossfire. They want us scattered. Elise cut him off, her words quick, clipped. Stay low, stay close. Follow my calls. He froze, meeting her eyes. For a moment, his panic wavered. She saw it, that small shift when someone realizes they can borrow steadiness from another. He nodded, jaw tight, and moved back to cover. The fight dragged. Minutes stretched into a grinding eternity. Every time Elise silenced one rifle on the ridge, another lit up further down. It was deliberate, coordinated. They weren't fighting scattered resistance. They were fighting an organized trap. She knew this pattern too well. She crouched behind the armored wheel of the lead truck, reloading with smooth precision. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory sharp from years of practice. But her mind spun back to the night her sister's last transmission came through. The clipped tone, the unfinished words, the sudden silence. It was the same tactic: pull them deeper, box them in, bleed them out. She clenched her teeth. She had carried that silence for months, carried it alone. And now, standing where her sister's boots had once pressed into dirt, Elise realized this wasn't just another mission. This was the echo of the same story. And she had a choice: let it end the same way or break the pattern. Her radio hissed, the commander's voice sharp with strain. We can't hold this, they're everywhere. Elise pressed her earpiece tighter, lowering her voice. Calm, controlled. They're not everywhere, they're funneling us. South Ridge is bait. North Ridge holds their spotters. If we cut them there, the crossfire collapses. Silence followed, long enough she thought he'd ignore her. Again. Then copy that. Teams shift fire North Ridge. The change was immediate. Rounds tore into the higher rock line, shattering stone, forcing enemy rifles down. The pressure on the convoy eased just slightly, like the valley had released one breath. Elise seized it. Move the wounded behind the second truck. Use it for cover. Keep the line tight. Voices began to align, no longer panicked but focused. The men weren't following the commander. They were following her. And still she stayed calm, steadier than she felt. Because inside, the old ache gnawed harder. Every bullet she fired was a refusal to let silence win again. A lull came, brief but sharp. Smoke drifted. The echo of gunfire lingered in the cliffs. Elise's ears rang. Her throat was dry. She shifted, scanning, waiting for the next wave. The driver next to her crouched low, whispering. How the hell are you so calm? She didn't look at him. Because if I break, we all break. Her words were quiet, but they landed heavy. He swallowed, nodding, as though he had just understood the weight she carried. Movement flashed on the northern ridge. Elise caught it first. Her scope aligned. One squeeze, another shadow fell. But then something else, a shape moving different from the rest. Larger, slower, not a rifleman, a spotter, a leader. Her gut twisted. She tracked him, finger on the trigger, but stopped. Because in that split second she saw something that froze her, the scarf tied at his waist. Torn, faded, but she knew the pattern, the same her sister had sent in a photo months before. Her breath caught, her vision blurred. It wasn't hers, couldn't be, but the recognition cut deep. She lowered the rifle, just for a heartbeat. A bullet screamed past her ear, close enough to sting. She blinked hard, shaking it off, heart hammering. No time for ghosts, not now. But the image lingered. That scarf, that impossible thread of memory, dragging her backward when she needed to move forward. The firefight pressed on. The convoy fought tooth and nail, their line holding only because Elise's calm steadied them like steel pins in broken timber. She kept shooting, kept calling, kept standing when others faltered. But deep inside, another silence grew, the silence of a question she couldn't shake. Had her sister been here? Had she been swallowed whole by this same valley, by these same men? Or, and this thought cut sharper, had she survived, only to be dragged into something darker? Elise reloaded, jaw clenched, refusing to let her hands tremble. The valley demanded answers, but it gave none. Not yet. The sun shifted higher, heat pressing down. Smoke clung to the air, acrid and heavy. Soldiers coughed between bursts of fire. The wounded groaned softly behind the trucks, and through it all, Elise's voice never wavered. When the enemy fire finally faltered, the valley fell into a brittle silence. Every soldier waited, listening, breathing shallow. Elise raised her rifle, eyes locked on the ridges. She didn't trust the quiet, not anymore. Because she knew in her bones, in her blood, this fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. How long can silence last before it becomes unbearable? The valley had fallen quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that pressed down on eardrums, thick and unnatural, as though the rocks themselves were holding their breath. Elise crouched behind the armored wheel of the lead truck, sweat running cold down her spine despite the relentless sun. Her hands were steady on her rifle, but her pulse thrummed in her throat. She didn't trust this stillness, not for a second. Around her, soldiers shifted slowly, checking magazines, whispering updates into radios. The wounded were dragged further back, their groans muffled beneath bandages hastily wrapped. One medic's gloves were soaked crimson, his jaw clenched, his eyes hollow. A private no older than 19 sat against a tire, helmet skewed, shaking as he lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. His breath hitched with every inhale, but his eyes stayed locked on Elise, watching, borrowing courage he didn't have from her face that refused to break. She exhaled softly, adjusting her scope, eyes sweeping the ridges again. Nothing moved, but absence wasn't safety. She knew this game: draw them in, pull back, wait for the next strike. Her radio hissed. The commander's voice came through, low, strained. Status. Elise keyed her mic, eyes still scanning. Wounded stable, ammo low, enemy fire ceased but they're repositioning. A pause, she could feel him doubting her again. You're certain? Yes. Her calm was its own kind of weapon. He didn't challenge it further. Another soldier slid beside her, back pressed against the truck. It was Sergeant Cole, broad-shouldered, eyes lined from too many sleepless nights. He glanced at her, voice a whisper meant for her alone. You think they're coming again? Elise's jaw tightened. They're not done. Cole nodded once, wiping sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. His bravado was gone now, stripped bare. He looked older in the silence, heavier. After a moment, he muttered, I left my boy a voicemail last night, just in case. Told him I'd be back before his birthday. His throat caught, the words breaking. He's turning 6. Elise kept her eyes forward, but her chest tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but words in moments like this felt fragile. Instead, she gave the smallest nod, steady, certain. A promise she couldn't guarantee but offered anyway. Cole exhaled, some of his tension easing. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The radio crackled again, reports from the rear. Distant echoes, maybe movement further along the valley, nothing confirmed. The convoy couldn't stay pinned. Supplies were low. Reinforcements were hours away if they came at all. The commander's voice returned, harder this time. We move in 10, tight formation, push through. Elise frowned, her scope sweeping the cliffs again. Move now and they'd walk straight into another kill zone. Stay and they'd bleed out slowly. Both choices carried death. Her finger traced the trigger guard absently, the way some might drum fingers against a table. A habit, a rhythm. She weighed both outcomes, running calculations in her mind. And then she saw it. Far on the northern ridge, half hidden by rock, a glint, not metal, not glass, fabric. Her chest froze. A scarf, torn, faded, the same she had seen in that brief flicker during the firefight. Her scope tightened, heart hammering. The wind tugged the fabric, revealing the pattern again, her sister's pattern. Her breath faltered. Was it possible? Could it be hers? Or just a cruel trick, fabric scavenged from the dead? Her hands shook, the first crack in her composure. She blinked hard, grounding herself in the dust, the heat, the weight of the rifle in her palms. Focus. Focus. Cole noticed. What is it? Elise swallowed, voice thin. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. She forced her breathing steady again, locking the tremor down, burying the storm beneath the surface. If she told them what she saw, they'd call it delusion. Grief. They'd pull her from the fight. She couldn't risk that. Not now. The order came. The convoy began to roll again, engines growling reluctantly, soldiers bracing for the next storm. Elise walked beside the lead truck, rifle raised, eyes never leaving the ridges. Her boots crunched over gravel, each step echoing louder than it should in the silence. The valley narrowed further. The sky became a strip of pale blue overhead, claustrophobic. Shadows stretched long across the dirt. Every instinct screamed at her. And then it came. The ambush broke like thunder. Explosions ripped through the dirt ahead, concussive waves knocking men off their feet. The ridges lit up with muzzle flashes, the sound a storm of metal and fire. The convoy lurched, men diving for cover, radios erupting with screams and commands. The world fractured into chaos again. Elise dropped to one knee, rifle snapping up. Her mind went silent, calmer than her pulse deserved. She called out positions, her voice slicing through the roar. Soldiers locked onto her cadence, firing where she directed, clinging to her certainty like a lifeline. Dust filled her lungs. Stone shattered near her head. A bullet tore the strap of her vest close enough to burn, but her hands never faltered. One shadow fell, then another. But they kept coming. The convoy staggered forward inch by inch, the trucks jerking through smoke and fire. Elise stayed at the front, her silhouette cutting steady against the chaos. And inside her, the question grew louder. If that scarf was real, if her sister had been here, what had become of her? The firefight stretched. The wounded grew. Ammunition dwindled. And still, Elise's calm anchored them, her unbroken steadiness holding the line when everything else threatened to shatter. But the valley wasn't finished. Because just as the convoy cleared the worst of the choke point, a voice crackled through the enemy's radio, intercepted, faint but clear. And Elise froze. It was a woman's voice. Low, steady, commanding. And for one impossible, breathless second, it sounded exactly like her sister. Could grief echo like a ghost through static? The enemy transmission crackled again, jagged and distorted, but unmistakable in cadence. Elise's breath caught in her chest. The battlefield seemed to dissolve around her, the smoke, the gunfire, the shouts, all muffled under the weight of that voice. It couldn't be. Her sister was gone, officially declared missing in action, presumed dead. Elise had lived with that verdict carved into her bones for months. And yet, the radio hissed once more, words broken, carried on a signal she wasn't supposed to hear. Hold them, steady cover, flank. A woman's voice, calm, clear, commanding. Her hands trembled against her rifle. For the first time since the convoy had rolled into the valley, Elise's calm cracked. Cole noticed. He always noticed. His rough hand pressed briefly against her shoulder, grounding her back in the dust, the heat, the chaos. "You good?" he shouted over the gunfire. Elise blinked, forcing her breathing into rhythm. Her face hardened again, steady. She nodded once, but her throat was too tight for words. How could she tell him? How could she tell anyone that the voice she'd heard, the one leading the enemy fire tearing into them, sounded like her sister? The thought alone was madness, dangerous, a distraction. She forced it down. Not now, survive first, questions later. Her rifle barked, precise shots carving order into the chaos. Men rallied around her again, her steadiness a lifeline against the storm. Each order she gave pulled them closer to survival, pulled them one step further from being swallowed whole by the valley. But inside, the question grew louder. Was it her? The convoy fought inch by bloody inch until the ridges thinned and the fire eased. Smoke hung heavy. The groans of the wounded grew clearer. The stench of burned fuel and iron filled every breath. At last the shooting stopped. Elise crouched low, rifle still ready, eyes sweeping every shadow. But the valley had gone quiet again, too quiet, leaving only the rasp of radios and the shallow gasps of exhausted men. The commander barked orders, pulling units back into rough formation, but his voice carried less authority now. The men were looking elsewhere. They were looking at her. Her calm had carried them through, and they knew it. But Elise barely registered their stares. Her ears still rang with that voice, carried on static like a ghost tugging her backwards. Night fell heavy. The convoy halted in a shallow depression, makeshift camp lit only by red lamps and cigarette embers. Soldiers slumped against rocks, cleaning weapons, checking bandages. The medic worked tirelessly, his hands never still, his face pale with exhaustion. Elise sat apart, rifle across her knees, eyes locked on the dark ridges above. Every flicker of movement in the shadows made her finger twitch. Cole approached quietly, settling beside her. He didn't speak at first, just sat there, hands rubbing together as though trying to scrub off something invisible. Finally, he muttered, "You saved a lot of us back there." She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed upward. After a long pause, he tried again. "You always this calm?" Her throat tightened. "No." The word was small, fragile, but it slipped out before she could stop it. Cole turned, studying her in the dim red light. He didn't press. He just waited. Elise's hand drifted to the chain around her neck, fingers brushing the locket hidden under her vest. She wanted to say it, wanted to tell someone the truth, the weight she carried, the reason her silence wasn't emptiness but survival. But she couldn't, not yet. Instead, she asked, "You ever feel like the past doesn't stay buried, like it follows you even here?" Cole's eyes darkened. He looked down at his hands, the calluses, the scars. "Every day." The simplicity of it hit harder than any explanation. He didn't pry. He didn't need to. The night stretched long. Every soldier carried their ghosts in silence. Elise carried hers louder than most. Sometime near dawn, the radio crackled again. Faint, intercepted, a woman's voice once more, calm, steady. Elise froze. Every nerve in her body screamed recognition. "Move them east, don't let break through." Her heart hammered so loud she thought others would hear it. She gripped the radio tight, her hand trembling. It was the same cadence, the same clipped calm, the same tone her sister used to use when giving instructions, even at the kitchen table when they were girls, planning childish games with military precision. She couldn't breathe. The medic's voice cut in behind her, pulling her back. "We've lost one." Elise turned sharply. A soldier lay still under a tarp, boots protruding into the dust. The medic wiped his hands against his blood-streaked trousers, his eyes glassy. Another silence, another life swallowed by the valley. Elise stood rigid, the locket burning against her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand answers from the night, to fire into the darkness until the voice revealed itself. Instead, she did what she always did. She stayed calm. Because if she broke, they all broke. The convoy rolled at first light. The valley stretched ahead, narrow and endless, shadows clinging to every ridge. The men were quieter now, worn thin, but every so often their eyes flicked to her, waiting, watching, trusting. Elise walked at the front again, her boots grinding over gravel, her rifle steady. But inside she was unraveling. Was it her sister, alive, fighting against them? Or was it just grief, cruelly twisting static into memory? The valley offered no answer, only silence. And as the sun rose higher, Elise realized something chilling. The only way to find out the truth was to keep walking deeper into the same trap that had swallowed her sister whole. What happens when soldiers stop believing orders will save them? By midday, the heat had become a weapon of its own. Sunlight poured down in sheets of white, glaring off the stone until the air shimmered. The valley floor baked, dust rising in every breath. Men staggered under the weight of their gear, helmets heavy, rifles clutched too tight. The convoy dragged forward, slower with every mile. The wounded jostled in the backs of trucks, their groans bleeding into the low rumble of engines. The smell of oil, blood, and sweat clung to everything, making every breath taste of metal. Elise walked at the front again, eyes sharp on the ridges. Her shoulders ached, but her grip on the rifle was iron. She didn't allow herself to stumble. She didn't allow herself to look weak, because she could feel their eyes on her. The men had stopped glancing toward the commander when things grew uncertain. Now their gazes flicked to her instead. Subtle, unspoken, but clear. Her calm had carried them this far, and they clung to it the way drowning men cling to driftwood. But calm wasn't weightless. It pressed into her chest, heavy as stone. Every step was a performance, every breath measured. Inside, her thoughts twisted like barbed wire. She replayed the intercepted transmission in her head. That voice, her sister's voice, every syllable seared into her memory. The possibility burned: was she alive? Or worse, had she been turned? She gritted her teeth, focusing on the terrain ahead. The ridges were too quiet. No birds, no movement, just silence, always silence. By late afternoon, they halted to refuel. Trucks idled, heat radiating from their hoods. Men slumped in the shade of rocks, canteens tilted back, helmets resting against knees. The medic knelt beside another soldier, rewrapping bandages gone dark with blood. Elise sat apart, rifle across her knees, scanning, always scanning. Cole approached, lowering himself heavily beside her. His uniform was streaked with dust, his face drawn. He handed her a canteen without speaking. She took it, drank sparingly, then passed it back. After a moment, he said, "They're holding on because of you." She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the cliffs. "I mean it," he pressed, voice low. "They follow your calls, not his." He didn't have to name the commander. Everyone felt it. The man's orders had become background noise. Elise's calm was what steadied their hands, their breath, their will to push forward. But she couldn't let that weight show. So she gave the smallest nod, her jaw tight, her silence saying more than words. Cole leaned back against the rock, rubbing his face with both hands. After a while, he murmured, "I keep thinking about what I said, about my boy. If I don't make it out, he won't remember me as anything but a voice on a phone." Elise turned her head slightly, studying him. He wasn't asking for comfort. He was confessing. "You'll make it," she said quietly. He gave a humorless chuckle. "You don't know that." Her eyes hardened. "I do." And though her words were impossible to guarantee, the way she said them, calm, certain, made him believe. For a moment she hated herself for it, hated the lie. But sometimes lies were softer than truths, and softer was what men needed to keep walking. Before she could say more, the radio hissed again. Static, then fragments. "Flank east, hold until nightfall." Elise froze. That voice again. Her breath hitched, pulse racing. She pressed the earpiece tight, straining, desperate to catch more. But the signal cut, leaving only silence. She closed her eyes briefly, pressing fingers against her temples. She could still hear it, that cadence, that tone. Cole noticed the tension in her posture. "What is it?" "Nothing," she forced out too quickly. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. The convoy moved again. Shadows stretched long across the valley floor. The air cooled, carrying with it the smell of stone and distant smoke. Elise walked at the front, her face calm, her insides a storm. Every step forward felt like chasing a ghost. At dusk, they reached a narrow pass. High cliffs pressed tight on both sides, shadows swallowing the trucks. The men tensed, eyes darting upward, fingers twitching on triggers. Everyone felt it, the trap. The commander barked for speed. Through now. Engines roared, trucks grinding forward. And then chaos. Explosions ripped the ground, shattering earth and stone. The pass lit up with muzzle flashes from above. Bullets poured down, a storm of fire and metal. The convoy lurched, soldiers diving for cover, radios screaming. Elise was already moving. Rifle raised, voice steady, calling out ranges, positions. Her words cut through the panic, sharper than the commander's frantic shouts. Men adjusted, rallied, fought back with precision they didn't know they had. She moved through smoke and chaos like stone in a river. Bullets snapped past, ricochets sparking off trucks, but her calm didn't break. And then she saw her. On the ridge, a silhouette against the firelight, a figure standing tall, issuing orders. For a heartbeat, Elise's world stopped. The build, the posture, the tilt of the head. It was her sister. Her throat closed, her hands trembled. But before she could blink, the figure turned, vanishing into smoke. "Elise!" Cole shouted, dragging her back as a burst of rounds slammed into the dirt near her boots. She dropped to cover, chest heaving, mind spinning. It couldn't be, it wasn't possible, and yet she had seen it. Her sister alive. The firefight raged around her, men crying out, trucks lurching, the valley shaking with fury. But Elise was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere between the battlefield and the photograph, inside her locket. Somewhere between duty and blood. And for the first time in the mission, her calm wavered. What happens when the one truth that anchors you suddenly feels like a lie? The echo of gunfire still clung to the cliffs when the last shots faded. Smoke hung heavy in the pass, curling around blackened rocks and shattered vehicles. The earth smelled of burnt rubber, hot steel, and blood. Soldiers moved like shadows, pulling the wounded back, dragging water and bandages into trembling hands. Engines sputtered, broken, or simply died. The convoy had survived, but only barely. Elise crouched behind the husk of a truck, her rifle across her knees, her lungs heaving. She forced her breaths to slow, forced her hands to stop trembling. No one could see, not now. Because what she had seen, or thought she'd seen, had unraveled something deep inside. Her sister on the ridge. She pressed her fingers against her temples, eyes squeezed shut. No, it couldn't be. She buried that grief years ago. Buried it so deep that even speaking her sister's name felt like pulling glass from her throat. But the silhouette, the voice, the orders shouted in a cadence too familiar to deny. Her chest tightened. "Elise!" Her eyes snapped open. Cole was crouched in front of her, his face grim, sweat streaking lines through the dust on his cheeks. "You good?" he asked, not the usual automatic question. His tone was sharp, searching. He had seen something. She gave a curt nod, too fast, too stiff. Cole didn't buy it, but he let it slide, for now. "The men are waiting," he said. "They need direction." The commander, his jaw worked. The commander lost them. Elise followed his glance. The officer was packing, shouting into a radio that spat only static, his voice breaking, his hands shaking. The men looked past him, restless, eyes searching for steadiness. And they found her. She rose slowly, every movement deliberate. She adjusted her rifle strap, squared her shoulders, stepped into view. The soldiers' gazes locked to her, almost in relief. Her calm returned, not natural, not effortless, but carved from sheer will. "Check sectors," she said firmly. "Set perimeters, water in pairs, ammo distribution now." Her voice cut through the haze, orders given without hesitation, each one precise. The men moved, grateful for clarity, grateful for her. Cole stood at her side, his presence solid, unspoken support. But inside, she was unraveling. She walked the perimeter with her rifle up, eyes scanning shadows, but every step pulled her deeper into memory. A girl's laugh, a shared bunk, whispered secrets after lights out, a pink ribbon tied to a rifle stock because her sister said soldiers deserved something soft to carry. Her throat ached, she forced her eyes forward. But the loop replayed the silhouette on the ridge, the voice through static. It wasn't possible unless... Her chest constricted with a thought she hadn't dared let surface until now. Unless her sister hadn't died, unless she had been taken, turned. The idea sank talons into her mind. That night under the shallow glow of lanterns, the men tried to rest. Some leaned against trucks, drifting into uneasy sleep. Others whispered low, trading stories, their voices thick with exhaustion. The medic worked quietly, wrapping bandages, whispering small comforts to men who needed them more than morphine. Cole sat near the fire, cleaning his rifle. His hands moved methodically, but his eyes flicked toward Elise every few minutes, watching, measuring. She sat apart, the firelight tracing sharp lines across her face, her expression unreadable. Her hand toyed with the locket hidden beneath her vest, the one she never took off. She could feel the men watching her, not directly, not openly, but in the way silence followed wherever she went. They leaned on her calm, needed it, and she couldn't let them see the storm behind her eyes. Cole finally broke the quiet. "You're carrying something you're not telling us." Elise didn't look up. "Everyone is." "Not like this." His voice was steady, but there was an edge of warning. "Whatever it is, it's pulling at you. I saw you freeze today." Her eyes snapped to his, sharp. "You don't freeze," he said softly. "Not you." The fire popped between them, embers sparking into the dark. For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally, "There's a voice on the enemy net, a voice I know." Cole frowned. "You recognize someone." She hesitated, her fingers closed tight around the locket. "My sister." The words landed heavy in the dust. Cole blinked as if he'd misheard, then his brow furrowed. "Elise, your file said." "She died," Elise cut him off, her voice low, fierce. "At least that's what I was told." Cole leaned forward. "And now you think." "I don't know what to think," her voice cracked barely, "but I saw her on that ridge, giving orders." The silence after was crushing. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. Cole rubbed his jaw, searching for words. If it is her, then maybe she's a prisoner, forced. Elise shook her head. She wasn't bound, she wasn't broken, she was commanding. Her throat tightened. She looked like she belonged. The admission cut something raw inside her. Cole exhaled slowly. "So what does that mean?" Elise stared into the fire. The flames blurred. Her calm cracked at the edges, pain seeping through. "It means the line between enemy and blood isn't as clear as I thought." Neither spoke after that. The night stretched long, punctuated by distant echoes in the cliffs, reminders that the enemy wasn't gone, only waiting. When dawn came, gray light spilling into the pass, Elise rose before the others. She checked her rifle, her pack, her perimeter, every action precise, deliberate, her mask sliding back into place. But behind her steady eyes burned a storm no one else could see. And for the first time since the mission began, Elise wasn't sure her calm would hold. How long can someone carry the weight of two wars, one outside, one inside, before something breaks? The morning sun washed the valley in pale light, cold against the stone. The convoy crept forward again, wheels grinding, men silent. No jokes, no idle chatter, just the sound of boots dragging dust and the rattle of rifles against armored plates. Elise led the front as always, her steps steady, her rifle loose but ready. She looked every part the soldier they needed, calm, unbroken, untouchable. But inside, her thoughts spun like a whirlpool. Her sister, alive, enemy. The contradiction chewed at her focus. Every shadow on the ridge felt like a taunt. Every echo of radio static felt like her name whispered in her ear. She couldn't let it show. but cracks spread in silence. By midday, the commander forced a halt near a dried riverbed. He ordered rest, but the way his voice shook betrayed him. The men obeyed with slow movements, not loyalty, exhaustion. Cole dropped heavily onto a rock, rolling his shoulders. His eyes found Elise instantly. They always did now. "You haven't slept." "I don't need to," she said flatly. He gave her a look. "Everyone needs to." She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the ridges again, scanning, always scanning. Cole leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They're seeing it too, you know, the way you're running things, the way he's not. They're with you, Elise." She shook her head sharply. "Don't. Don't what? Don't put that weight on me." Her voice was steel, but her fingers twitched against the rifle stock. Cole studied her for a long beat. Then he said softly, "Maybe you don't get to choose. Maybe leadership chooses you." Before she could respond, the sound hit them. A low, rhythmic thud. Helicopter blades. But not theirs. The soldiers scrambled, eyes darting to the sky. Elise dropped to one knee, rifle up, tracking the sound. Shadows swept over the ridgeline and then figures. Enemy troops rappelling down, fast, coordinated, rifles slung across their chests. "Contact," someone shouted. Gunfire ripped the silence apart. Bullets cracked against stone, dust spraying. Trucks roared as drivers scrambled to turn them, engines growling in panic. Elise moved without thought, calling ranges, cutting through chaos with precision. Her voice steadied the men even as the commander's barked orders dissolved into noise. They formed a defensive arc, returning fire. The valley filled with echoes, shouts, ricochets sparking against rock. Elise squeezed off controlled bursts, dropping shapes that darted across the ridges. But then her earpiece hissed. And the voice came. "Elise." Her blood froze. It was clear this time, not a trick of memory, not static, her sister's voice. Sharp, commanding, deliberate. "You don't belong with them." Her chest tightened. The world around her blurred, gunfire muffled, shouts distant. For a breathless second it was only that voice. "Elise." Her throat burned. Cole's hand slammed against her shoulder, dragging her back. "Stay with me." The battlefield snapped back into focus. Bullets cracked inches from her head. She dropped, firing upward, forcing herself to breathe. But she couldn't shake it. The voice wasn't a hallucination. It was real. She was out there, leading them. The firefight stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, the helicopters pulled back, the enemy retreating into shadow as suddenly as they had appeared. The silence that followed was jagged, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the hiss of cooling metal. The men sagged in relief. They had held, barely. But Elise felt no relief. She felt hollow. That night the survivors huddled in the dark, the fire kept low, their eyes wide and restless. No one trusted the ridges anymore. Every flicker of movement sent hands snapping to triggers. Cole sat beside Elise, his face pale in the dim light. He didn't ask this time. He just said, "It was her, wasn't it?" Elise stared into the dirt, her jaw clenched. Cole exhaled. "I heard it too," the voice. Her eyes snapped to his. He nodded grimly. "You're not imagining it." The confirmation hit harder than denial. "She's alive," Elise whispered, the words tasting like blood. "Alive and against us." Cole rubbed his face. "What the hell do we do with that?" Elise closed her eyes. She saw her sister's silhouette on the ridge, commanding soldiers with the same sharp precision she once used to teach Elise how to aim straight, how to breathe between shots. Her chest ached. "I don't know," she admitted, the hardest words she had ever spoken. The men shifted restlessly in the dark, their trust in Elise unspoken but palpable. They believed her calm was unbreakable, that she would always know what to do. But inside she was breaking. She lay awake long after the others had drifted into uneasy sleep. The stars burned cold above the cliffs. the night air sharp in her lungs. Her hand found the locket again. The photograph inside was worn, creased at the edges. Two girls, arms around each other, smiling. She traced the outline with her thumb until her chest hurt too much to breathe. And then in the silence, she whispered into the dark, "Why, Anna, why?" No answer came, only the endless waiting night. And Elise knew tomorrow, the war outside and the war inside would collide. She could not hide it much longer. What do you hold on to when the world demands you let go? The convoy reached the high plateau at dawn. The sun spilled over jagged cliffs, painting the valley in fire and shadow. Engines sputtered, men staggered, but they kept moving, because there was nowhere else to go. The commander trailed at the rear now, his voice hoarse from shouting into radios that never answered. His authority had dissolved somewhere back in the pass, abandoned alongside burnt-out trucks and unburied dead. The men no longer looked to him. They looked forward, to her. Elise. She walked at the head, rifle steady, eyes sharp. Her boots struck dust in rhythm with her heart. Outwardly, she was unbroken calm, the one anchor holding the mission together. Inwardly, she carried a storm that roared with every breath. On it. Her sister's name was a wound she couldn't close. She had buried it for years, smothered it in silence. But the battlefield had dug it up, forced her to face it. The silhouette, the voice, the impossible truth. A live enemy. The words tangled in her chest like barbed wire. By midday, they reached a canyon mouth, the only passage north. The cliffs towered on both sides, jagged teeth waiting to close. The men slowed, glancing upward, hands twitching on triggers. Everyone felt it. The trap. Elise lifted a fist, halting the column. Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the creak of cooling engines. Her eyes scanned the ridges, her breath measured. And then she heard it. A voice amplified, carried on the canyon wind. Elise. The men froze, heads turned. The sound rolled like thunder between stone walls. Elise's chest tightened. She knew that voice too well. Lay down your weapons. You don't need to die for them. The soldiers looked to her, confusion and fear etched across their faces. None of them understood, but Cole did. He glanced at Elise, his jaw tight. "It's her," he whispered. Elise said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. The men shifted uneasily, whispers stirring. Who was this voice that knew her name? Before panic could take root, Elise stepped forward, into the open. Her calm didn't falter. Her rifle hung at her side, her chin lifted. Every soldier behind her watched as if their survival depended on her next breath. Above, a figure emerged. Sunlight caught her outline, painting her in fire. Same posture, same stance, same eyes. On it. Elise's throat closed. She looked older, harder, her uniform marked with insignia that didn't belong to any side Elise recognized. Her sister, alive, commanding. The canyon seemed to shrink around them, silence stretching taut as wire. Finally, Elise spoke, her voice carried steady. Why? The word cracked through the canyon like a shot. Anna's gaze didn't waver. Because truth isn't what they told us. Because loyalty to them is death. To us, it's survival. Elise's hands trembled against her rifle. She forced them still. To them, you're the enemy. Anna's lips curved into something almost like sorrow. And to me, you are. The men behind Elise shifted, the weight of the moment pressing on every chest. Some raised rifles, waiting for her signal. But Elise lifted a hand, no fire. Not yet. Cole stepped closer, his voice low, urgent. Elise, this isn't just about you anymore. They'll follow whatever you do next. Elise's breath hitched. He was right. This wasn't just her war. It was theirs. Dozens of lives balanced on the edge of her choice. Anna's voice cut through again. Come with me, leave them. You don't owe them your life. You never did. Elise's mind reeled back to childhood whispers in the dark, to promises made under starlight. We'll always find each other. no matter what. Her throat burned. For one terrible moment, she wanted to believe. But then she turned just enough to see them, the men behind her. Their faces drawn, their eyes fixed on her with unspoken trust. They weren't perfect. They weren't always brave, but they were hers, and they were alive because she had stood calm when the world demanded collapse. She turned back to Anna, her voice steady. "I can't." Anna's eyes hardened. "Then you'll die with them." The canyon erupted. Gunfire poured from the ridges, a storm of lead and stone. The men dropped, returning fire, shouts echoing against the walls. Dust exploded around Elise's boots as rounds chewed into the earth. She didn't flinch. She raised her rifle, sighted upward, and fired. Calm, precise. Each shot measured, each breath controlled. The battle raged like thunder, deafening, endless. Men cried out, smoke clawed the sky, and still Elise moved steady, her voice carrying through the chaos. Ranges, flanks, focus. Her calm cut sharper than fear. And in that fury, for a flicker of a second, she saw Anna again, standing tall on the ridge, her rifle lowered, her eyes locked on Elise, through smoke and distance. A silence lived in that gaze, a recognition, a memory of sisters who once promised never to let go. Then Anna turned, vanishing into shadow. The battle ended hours later when the ridges fell silent and the last echoes died. The convoy still stood, scarred, bloodied, but alive. Because of her. The men collapsed against stone, their breath ragged. Some cried, some whispered prayers. Cole sat heavily beside Elise, his face streaked with soot, his